Hello, this is Philosophy 74, and we are doing this is week 7 for us, and we are doing Epictetus. This is the part of the class, second part of the class, whose title is Happiness, right? The title of part 2 is Happiness, Excellence, Dependency, and Care. So we did part 1 uh, where we mainly focused on the split between ethics and the law, and we saw starting from week two. Week one was a general introduction that we had to philosophy, ethics, the question of precisely the unjust law. Then we did Plato's Euthyphro and the Apology, right? Socrates and Plato. Then Antigone by Sophocles, and the letter from Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King. And then we also saw Kant, Immanuel Kant, the fundamental principles of the metaphysics of morals. In any case, now we do happiness, excellence, dependence, and care. We already had 2 weeks on Aristotle, right? Some books 1, 2, and 3 from the ethics, the Nicomachean ethics, right? So we saw the idea of happiness as the good life, eudaimonia. We saw the question of a virtue or a excellence, decision, the principle of action, the mean, as the intermediate point between too much and too little. And when we did actually speak about the question of a decision, deliberation and decision in Aristotle, in book 3 of the Ethics, I also said that there was a connection right there that I would highlight between what Aristotle does and what Epictetus, not only Epictetus, but many in the post Aristotelian tradition say in ethics, right? Indeed, Epictetus begins his manual, right? The title that you have, right? The text that you have is called the original title Enchiridion, which means manual or handbook. It's a kind of what we had today, like a kind of only uh, how-to book, right? Or self-help book in a sense, right? But it is a manual, so it's very practical, which is what ethics ultimately is. Aristotle also says ethics is a practical science. Practical meaning that you have to put it precisely into practice. And actually, this is the way in which the book by the manual by Epictetus, who is a Stoic. I will say more about this in a moment. Begins. Okay, I just read this, then I'll go back to a few words about Epictetus, and then we continue. I will highlight some passages in this book. Okay, so he says there are things which are within our power, and there are things which are beyond our power. Okay, this is a very powerful outset, right? And this is something that, in a sense, you already find in book 3 of Aristotle's Ethics. Okay, so some things are in our power, some things are not in our power. Okay, so this is central in the Stoic philosophy in general, right? It's a long tradition of Stoicism. Check that as well. Maybe Google it, and do some. You don't have to do necessarily additional research, but because we are not meeting in the face-to-face situation, or in any case, if you have questions, as always, contact me, right? Email me, text me, and so on. And also remember to do the weekly discussion board entry, okay, that you have to do this time will be on Epictetus, and precisely then you can speak about other things, but my suggestion for your entry is precisely Epictetus says that some things are up to us and some aren't. right? Some things are up to us, some things are not up to us, some things are in our power, some things are not in our power. So, what is the importance of this? I mean, elaborate on this idea. Do you agree with the Stoic idea of emotional detachment or apatheia? Okay, so that's basically what the Stoics say, that in order to precisely have what Aristotle also called, the good life. What you have to do is to practice this apatheia. You can check that word, it's in the syllabus. In any case, apathy, right? Which means to stay away from pathos, Pathos, pathos or pathos, depending on the pronunciation, which is pain, suffering. It means it names the emotions, right? And the prefix apatheia, apathy, is the negation, right? So no suffering, no emotions, no feelings, detachment, emotional detachment rather than attachment. This is the ideal of the Stoic tradition and other traditions as well, but apathy in particular in the Stoic tradition. And the idea is that otherwise, right, the emotions, the problem is that the emotions can, and they are so strong, right, that they can overwhelm and overpower and destroy us altogether, right? Something terrible happens, what can you do? There are situations in which we can't do much or we can't do anything really, right? But only maybe surrender in a sense and accept that this is the situation, a disaster, a tragedy, and so on. We are living through this right now with this unprecedented catastrophe that is unfolding of the pandemic, right? The coronavirus, COVID 19 pandemic. So, I mean, certainly there is much that we can do, but precisely the Stoic practical philosophy helps us also in that sense. Focus on what is in your power, right? Forget about what is not in your power. There are things that we can't control, so let's focus on and try to work on the things that are within our reach, within our power, the things that we can control. All right, so that's basically what. So the Stoic philosophy is ultimately not difficult from the theoretical point of view. The theory is very simple. In a sense, it might be difficult to put that philosophy into practice. I mean, by experience, also when I teach this in the face-to-face situation, there is always this, legitimate question, right? Arising. So how can you, in the face of adversity, in the face of tragedy, in the face of something terrible happening, how can you be detached, right? I mean, it seems that the Stoics are, and Epictetus, one of them, right? Then you can check more about, I don't have the time to go into that whole question of the tradition, of the Stoic tradition. It is not only Epictetus. Another important name is, for example, Marcus Aurelius. Interestingly, Marcus Aurelius was an emperor, a Roman emperor who was also a philosopher. Epictetus was a slave who then became a free man. That's in antiquity, and then a philosopher. But then another important name is Seneca, that you can check as well, right? Who was Nero's tutor and died because of Nero. But in any case, the idea is in the practical philosophy of Stoicism that we only and always had to remember, we had to focus on the things that are within our own power. You will remember that Aristotle says whether we speak about deliberation and then decision, deliberation comes before decision. we had to be clear as to what, for example, we can deliberate on. Not everything is open to deliberation. For example, past things, they are not open to deliberation, not to decision. Right? I can't decide about something which is already past or deliberate about it, or the exact sciences, the natural phenomena, and so on and so forth, right? Or questions of in very personal daily lives, sickness and death, the death of loved ones, and so on and so forth. When these things happen, then there is very little that we can do if not learn how to handle the emotions, how to not control in very strong sense, in the sense of repression, right? The emotions. I mean, it's not that we had to repress and control in the sense of yeah, master in the sense of manage. We had to know how to manage and how to handle these emotions that can be very strong, right? I mean, all emotions. I mean, think about fear, and of course, Epictetus speaks about that as well. And the mistakes that we make because of fear or anger, right? Hatred or even love. What is usually maybe considered to be a good emotions, but love, excessive love, right, can also be overwhelming, overbearing, and can also be destructive, right? So all the emotions must be handled the proper way, and the proper way to handle the emotions is to be detached, right? To practice detachment, right? So, in a sense, that's basically the idea. Okay, I mean, to not to be indifferent in the sense of saying who cares, but to know how to care. In fact, care, and actually, this section of the class has care in its title. Remember the section, right? Part two of the class. From week 5 to week 8 is called happiness, that we saw with Aristotle, but we are looking at even now with Epictetus, happiness in the sense of the proper way to lead one's life, excellence, virtue, then dependency and care. We'll speak about dependency next time in particular, but care is important. We'll speak about care too next time, week 8, but care is also important in the Stoic tradition and for Epictetus. So the question is not that apathy, apatheia, detachment, right, from the emotions doesn't mean uh, carelessness, that I don't care about. No, again, like I said earlier, a moment ago, it means that we had to know how to care, right? Because caring is not an easy thing, right? So the question is to learn how to care also for oneself, the care of the self, right, is also basic in the Stoic tradition in general, right? I mean, also because in order to then also be able to care for other people, right? We had to be able to and know how to care for ourselves. Think about this in terms of general ethics. Apply this to situations. Daily situations. Think about this also in the context of what's going on today in the field of, not only health care, the health professions, but society at large. But with the pandemic, precisely, people working in the health professions are, of course, exposing themselves to a grave danger more than others. In order to, and they do so because in order to be able to care for others, but of course in order to be able to care for others, you have to be also you have to care for yourself to begin with, right? I mean, so I mean, this taking care of oneself and taking care of others is fundamental in the Stoic tradition. In order to do so, we must be very clear as to the distinction between what is in our power and what is not in our power, what is up to us and what is not up to us. Okay, so I don't want to keep this very long, so I mean I just read a few more lines. You read the whole manual. It's short, especially pay attention to the highlighted parts, right? But section one of the Enchiridion, or again a manual by Epictetus, right after the words I just read. I read from your version. Okay, there are things which are at times maybe I read from the other version as well. There are things which are within our power, and there are things which are beyond, which are not within our power, right? So then Epictetus says, within our power are opinion, aim, desire, aversion, and in one word, whatever affairs are our own. Beyond our power are body, property, reputation, office, and in one word, whatever are not properly our own affairs. Okay, so I mean, think about what this might be. Why, for example, body is not something which is in our power. I mean, might be also the question of precisely, uh, the question of ability, for example. We'll speak about the question of, the next time we'll touch on the question of disability as well. Biology, simply a question of biology. Reputation too, I mean, we can try to do what we should do, right, to behave the proper way, but then the reputation that we have is ultimately something which is up to others and so on. So, but in any case, what he says is that things within our power are by nature free, unrestricted, unhindered, but those beyond our power are weak, dependent, restricted, and alien, okay, foreign. So, I mean, that's basically what you have to think about in any case, the difference between, and build on this idea by reading other, sections from the manual, and try to give elaborate on what it means to say that some things are within our power and some aren't, and how can we build an ethics based on this, because that's so a way of behaving, right, comporting ourselves in the world of living, right, our daily life. That's basically what this is about. Okay, so he says fundamentally, if you learn this, if you know how to care the proper way about things, right, to focus on things that are in your power and to forget about those that are not in your power, then you will not have an enemy, nor will you suffer any harm. That's basically the idea. Okay, so because it is ultimately up to you. Another idea that we will see in a moment, which is very important in Epictetus, in the Stoics, is that very often we are troubled, and we are frightened not by things in their real existence, not by things as such, but by the opinion that we make of them, by the way we think about things. So I mean, again, things are what they are, reality is what it is, right? But what we can actually change, modify, or not by way of manipulating it in falsifying reality, right? But by way of understanding, making sense of reality, what we can work on is precisely the opinion we make of things, very often not things themselves. That's basically the idea. So that we see in For example, if you go to again, all sections are important, but section 5 in the manual, right, you will find people, men, people, right, are disturbed, right? Disturbance is very important, something that happens psychologically, right, in the mind, emotionally, right? Men are disturbed not by things. That's what I was saying before, okay? Right? So this is very important, but by the views which they take of things, right? The opinion, the view that I make that I take of something, that is what really troubles me, disturbs me, frightens me, and so on and so forth, okay? Even that. And Epictetus will say that, and then other philosophers too, that we are not doing in this class. But I mean, that's also, it's the unknown. People are precisely very often afraid of anything, that has to do with the unknown. That's particularly, but again, because of very often, you know relying on the ignorance of things, right? I mean, the question is that what we had to do for Epictetus, for other philosophers as well, in this post-Aristotelian tradition after Aristotle, is to precisely dispel ignorance and understanding the nature of things, right? So I mean, and actually Epictetus continues in this very section 5 of the manual. He says, thus death is nothing terrible, otherwise it would have appeared so to Socrates. And Socrates makes the same point in the Apology, actually, and we probably saw that, right? So that is not, but the terror, he continues, the fear, the terror consists in our notion of that. So that is terrible. So that we think it is terrible. So that's why we are so frightened by it, because of the view we take of it, the opinion we make of it. Okay. So that's basically the idea. So what we had to focus on is then our views, and so that's okay. Um, mm, that's what Epictetus says, right? So, and actually, the end of the section 5 is it is the action of an uninstructed person, or a person who doesn't really have education, not in the formal sense of schooling, but real life education, self education, right? So it is the action of an uninstructed, uneducated person to reproach others for his own misfortunes, or one entering upon instruction to reproach himself, and or one perfectly instructed to reproach neither others nor himself. Okay? Maybe I want to read also from the other version, it might be more clear, right? That I have to accuse others for one's own misfortunes is a sign of a want of education. To accuse oneself shows that one's education has begun. To accuse neither oneself nor others shows that one's education is complete. Okay? So, not to put the blame on anyone for things that happen, right? Not even on oneself, but to accept the way in which things happen, right, rather than wanting them to happen the way we want, we desire, right? And again, not to waste effort and time with things that are not in our power. Again, this doesn't mean that the Stoics say, well, then anything goes. We can, no. I mean, again, the idea is to be able to really to learn really how to care and how to handle the emotions and the situations in life the proper way. Then he goes into the question of sickness, but it is, there is another important passage that I certainly want to read for you, with you, which is 11, right? Then you will see that, but 11 in section 11, Epictetus says, never say of anything, I have lost it, but I have given it back, right? So he continues, he says, has your wife died? She was given back. Has your estate been taken from you? Well, was not this also given back? And so on and so forth. And this idea, which might be a bit difficult, right? I mean, unless we understand it the proper way, someone dear to us dies, and Epictetus says, right, don't think of this in terms of, I lost this person, but this person was given back. That's quite difficult, maybe. So, what does that mean? I leave that up to you to think about this, but certainly this doesn't mean that we should not care at all about what happens, but that we should be able to accept, right, what is not in our power, what happens anyway, but is not in our power to be in any way different. We can't change it, right? So what we can do, the only power we have, is to cope with it, is to be able to, continue, right, and without being destroyed by the emotions, okay, that we may, that we do certainly experience. And then actually, this the end of this section 11 is great, right? That you should focus on this as well and elaborate on this too. So he says, while he permits you to possess it, okay, hold it. So he says, basically, treat, you know treat things, okay, as long as he gives it to you, take care of it, but not as your own. Anything, don't consider whatever as your own possession, a person or a property, and so on and so forth, because there is also the moment in which, right, it will be precisely according to his language, it will be given back. So do not attach yourself too much to anything, right? Because it's going to be given back, right? So you are going to, we might say otherwise, lose it, right? And he continues, and this is the end of this section, it's really great. Treat everything as passerby, right? As passersby treat an inn. Treat everything as travelers, as do travelers at an inn, right? A hotel, an inn, right? Where you use things, but they don't become your own things. It's not a matter of a possession. It's not about possessing things. It's about using them and leaving them, for others to be used in turn, right? So again, everything in life should be treated the same way, right? The way travelers do when they travel, when they go to a hotel and so on, okay? So this is very important, and probably I will, there are some other very important moments, of course, here too, but I will probably wrap up, and here you read the other sections, and right, but for example, there is one point, um, where he says, let me just maybe read one more from one other, for example, 14, section 14, he says, if you wish your children and your wife, that's, the gendered way of your wife, your husband, your partner, whoever, right, and your friends to live forever, then if you basically, if you wish, the people you love to live forever, then you're foolish. That's basically the idea, right? For you wish things to to be in your power which are not in your power, and what belongs to others to be your own. Then I skip 2 lines, and then he continues, but if you wish not to be disappointed in your desires, I mean, desire is fundamental in the emotions, among the emotions, emotional life, then that is in your own power. Exercise, therefore, what is in your power. Okay, so section 14 goes back to the beginning, the outset of this, right? And then he says precisely this, that if you do so, then again you will be free, right? The question of desire is important. Of course, desire is fundamental in the emotions, the emotional state. I mean, we cannot eliminate desire, nor should we. I mean, that's the point in Stoic philosophy, right? In Epictetus, the Stoics in general, it's not that we should get rid of desire, but again, we should be able to handle it the proper way, okay? Just like the emotions in general, okay? So it is again in section 16, for example, he goes back to the question that what's important is the view we choose to take of something. This might be problematic, but in any case, I leave that up to you to elaborate on this. Again, the idea is again a Stoic philosophy, Epictetus in particular, right? I mean, there are elements that go back to things that we saw in Aristotle, the importance of our agency, what is in our power, what we can deliberate on and decide about in perhaps a more, in a stronger way. In Epictetus, we find, especially at the very powerful, right, outset, right, of the manual, again, in section 1, and then everything is built on that fundamental statement, truth. Who could deny that some things are in our power and some things are not in our power? This seems to be a truth that no one can really, right, deny. So the question is then, following from that, because that is the truth that establishes, right, the foundations of this type of practical philosophy. The question is of the practice then, right, that comes on the basis of this understanding, the basis of this truth. Okay, so I leave that up to you too. Again, I mean, that's your task now to write something on this, to elaborate on this, read the material, watch the video, you can react to the video as well, to the material, write something. And because this is what we are doing this semester, because of the emergency situation, try maybe to elaborate a bit more as you do your entry. Okay, so see you next time, next week, when we will do precisely, we'll continue with the question of dependency and care. For this week, with Epictetus, the key words that I put in the syllabus, you can go back and see that as well, were distance from the emotions. But now we understand what this distance from the emotions is, and how this will link to the theme of next class, which will be on the question of dependency and care. Okay, all right, see you next time. Bye, thank you.